Okay, this is our introduction to psychology. For many of you, this will be revision from Stage 1 psychology, but this is really important as it forms the basis for everything we do for the rest of the year. So first of all, we actually want to define what psychology is. It comes from two Greek words, psyche meaning mind, logos meaning study or knowledge. And it was initially the study of the mind, but now the widely accepted definition is that it's the systematic study of thoughts, feelings and behaviour and the factors that influence these. Basically, why we behave the way we do. And with the aim to describe, predict, control and explain thoughts, feelings and behaviour. Obviously we can get along a lot better in the world if we're able to accurately describe how people are thinking and feeling, then able to predict how people are going to behave in certain situations, and then effectively control and explain it. Now, generally we have to look at behaviour rather than thoughts and feelings. Even though psychology is the study of thoughts and feelings, we can't really look at thoughts and feelings because thoughts and feelings are not observable. Behaviour is observable. So an observable action made by a living person or animal, that's what behaviour is. And psychologists distinguish behaviour from thoughts and feelings based on that definition, based on the fact that we can't see thoughts and feelings. You can't look at someone and know what they are thinking and feeling, as you can with behaviour. So behaviour is any response that can be seen or measured. And since thoughts and feelings are said to influence behaviour, we feel like we can then make judgments about people's thoughts and feelings based on their behaviour. But when we are studying psychology, we're pretty much always studying behaviour. Now, psychology and psychiatry are very often linked, but they are not actually the same. There are many aspects that are shared, but the main difference is the required qualifications. A psychiatrist is a qualified medical doctor. So they've gone to medical school, they've become a doctor, they've worked as a GP, and then they've obtained additional qualifications to specialise in the diagnosis, treatment and prevention of mental illness and emotional problems. They're able to perform medical procedures, prescribe medications and also recommend hospitalisation. So they're a doctor. A psychologist, on the other hand, it does 4 years full-time study and then post-grad study, in an effect and a science degree. They are not trained or qualified to perform medical procedures or prescribe medications. So you could look at the difference being a psychologist is a scientist and a psychiatrist is a doctor. Counselling and other psychological therapies are done by psychologists, but they can't hospitalise patients. Psychologists can also work in a range of different places, like in different workplaces, within the sporting field, in forensics. There's a lot of different areas psychologists can work in. But ultimately, psychology is a science. Everything that we know about psychology and behaviour is based on empirical evidence that has been discovered through the scientific method. Psychologists use a scientific method to study behaviour. This is the systematic approach for planning, conducting and reporting research that involves collecting empirical evidence. And empirical evidence is data collected directly by observation or through experimentation. Collecting data through empirically based research allows psychologists to draw accurate conclusions free from bias. So it's not just a bunch of people sitting around going, oh yeah, I reckon caffeine probably affects people in some way. They systematically get evidence to support their conclusions that are free from their own agendas, from what they think is going to happen. It's all based on evidence. That doesn't mean that scientific research is error-free though. They make mistakes, errors happen. The idea is that you design research studies in such a way that they should be able to be repeated to ensure the results are accurate or can be applied to other situations. Replication involves repeating a study to establish whether results obtained can be duplicated and are therefore reliable. Because if you do the same study twice and get completely different results, what your results are, they're probably not going to be particularly reliable. So psychology is a scientific way of explaining behaviour. It's all based on evidence and scientific research. There are lots of non-scientific explanations of behaviour, lots of ways of explaining behaviour that are not based on science, and some of these approaches claim to be scientific, but they are not. They have scientific sounding names and use very elaborate systems like astrology, numerology, graphology and palmistry, and these kind of alternative approaches are called pseudosciences. So astrology is the belief that the movement of the stars and planets influences behaviour and events in our lives. Numerology involves examining significant numbers in an individual's life, like your birthday or your house number, to describe influences. But these are not areas of psychology and are not based on any kind of evidence or scientific research. Psychologists and other scientists generally hold a view that the methods and results of these kind of practices are usually accurate and not based on true science. There's also common sense and faith or personal belief. Psychologists know that these can't be used as a sole basis for explaining behaviour or determining whether something is true. Very often we've have got our own ideas about why people behave the way they do, and we talk about them like their fact. This is sometimes called common sense psychology, but it's just that. It's just the things that are based on our own experiences and our own beliefs. So we often try to use this common sense judgments to understand our own behaviour and that of others, and we use our life experiences to develop opinions on issues. So I'm sure you've all got opinions about how children think, how drugs affect you, the effect of stress, how to improve your memory. Just based on your own life experiences, you've probably got opinions on all those things. But common sense psychology often leads to inaccurate conclusions about behaviour because it's not based on evidence, it's just based on individual experience. So if you look at this list of things, these might be things you might hear people shout around and throw around and hear, yeah, that sounds about accurate. You know, children who wear spectacles tend to be high achievers, or absence makes the heart grow fonder. But scientific psychological research has shown every single one of these to be false. So any one of these you might believe, but the evidence points to them being false. So that's just one way to show that common sense psychology, the things that you might just think are true, are not necessarily accurate and based on evidence. So common sense psychology is not a reliable source of information because many people do not critically evaluate their own beliefs. There's this thing called confirmation bias where we're more likely to believe things that support our own beliefs and ignore contradicting evidence. So someone's opinion about psychology is not particularly reliable. Are you getting the idea that it's all based on evidence? Another way of explaining behaviour or reading the mind is psychics, people who claim to have that extra ability, supernatural powers associated with the mind. Laws of nature can't explain them, that's why they're called supernatural. Some psi abilities are known as extrasensory perception, or ESP. It's the idea that you're able to perceive events through means outside the 5 known senses, like telepathy, which is the ability to read minds or mentally communicate, and precognition, knowing events that will occur in the future. And of course there's been much research into ESP and other psychic abilities, and in almost all cases psychologists have raised concerns about the research used and the validity of the results, and other alternative explanations have been found. Many of these studies have not able to been replicated, so some people have done studies to prove psychic abilities but then haven't got the same results later. So most psychologists remain unconvinced that any type of psychic ability is possible, and that more often than not psychics are actually using knowledge of psychology to understand and predict the way people will behave to make people believe that you are reading their mind or predicting their future. There is a video on the curriculum videos drive in Psychology, Introduction to Psychology, from the show Lawrence Lung's Unbelievable, where he talks to someone who explains how psychics do what they do. So if you want to go check that out, that is on the curriculum videos drive. So what is the scientific method? If all of those psychic astrology things are not based on science, how do psychologists actually get their information? How do they draw conclusions about behaviour? Well, they use the scientific method. First, they have to identify the research problem. So this enables the researcher to become familiar with the topic and what they're talking about. They might be looking at the effects of caffeine on stress. So they're able to look at, okay, what is the problem? What am I actually going to be looking at? And then they formulate a hypothesis, some kind of testable prediction. I predict the more caffeine you drink, the higher your stress levels will be. Third, they need to design the method. So determine how they're actually going to test that hypothesis. And there's a number of research methods to choose from that we'll talk about a little bit later in another lecture. But what they need to do is determine what method they're going to use to best answer their question or test the hypothesis. Then they collect their data. So based on that plan, they organise participants to be involved and conduct their study. Then they analyse the data, summarise, organise it, represent it in some kind of logical way. And then they're able to determine whether their hypothesis is supported or rejected when they interpret it. Draw some kind of conclusion. Was their hypothesis proven or disproven? What does it say about behaviour? And finally, they need to report it. And psychology reports follow a very strict format. Those of you who did psychology last year will be aware of it, but we're going to go through it again when we do our own psychological investigation. So they need to report and say what they found and also outline any problems that there might have been in the study. So that is a brief introduction to what psychology is and how we know what we know. Next one, we'll be looking more at the research methods that psychologists use to draw their conclusions about behaviour.